Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my power rankings for the 2024 Brazilian Grand Prix. My first time doing power rankings in this format. We'll see how it goes. Can't guarantee it'll be like this every weekend, but had some time today, so decided we'll do it this way. And so let's get started. So starting off in number 20, a driver who definitely did not have a particularly strong Grand Prix weekend. In fact, they didn't even participate in the Grand Prix today, and that is Lance Stroll. So coming in at 20th in my power rankings. Qualified for the sprint qualifying 19th, finished 19th in the sprint after starting from the pit lane. In qualifying, honestly not too bad. Did get himself up into Q3, benefited a bit from basically causing that red flag at the end of Q2. Was out-qualified by his teammate by 1.3 seconds, which is a pretty big gap, but again, in wet conditions, those gaps are much larger than they would normally be in the dry. And then in the Grand Prix, didn't even start, made a really boneheaded mistake on the formation lap. And honestly, the spin itself wasn't that big of a deal because, basically half the grid spun at some point today. But I think it was really just coming back onto the track. He basically decided to go through the gravel and not either go around or just take the asphalt escape road that he basically ended up there, and how he ended up there in the first place. So yeah, not a great weekend, I felt, for Lance Stroll. So next, number 19, a guy who has unfortunately there's been a lot of rumors about what seat he'll be in for next year, but I don't really think he had a particularly strong weekend, and that is Franco Kase. Sprint qualifying, qualified 14th, ended up 12th in the sprint qualifying, crashed in qualifying, qualified 18th, was out-qualified by his teammate Albon by 2.198 seconds. And then in the Grand Prix, I think the pace was okay. It looked all right for the first half of the Grand Prix or so, but then of course crashed behind the safety car, basically trying to catch up. So it was really unfortunate for him. I don't think he would have gotten points in this Grand Prix, but it was just one of those silly rookie mistakes. Hopefully he'll learn from it and he'll be bounced back at the next Grand Prix in Las Vegas. Number 18 is his teammate, Alex Albon. So the other driver this weekend who didn't start the Grand Prix. The reason I decided to put Albon a bit higher than Stroll, higher than his teammate Colapinto, was I did feel like for basically the sprint portion of the weekend, I thought he did pretty well. So that bumps up his ranking a little bit. So sprint qualifying, qualified 9th, and then ended up finishing 10th in the sprint. Unfortunately, no points for 10th in the sprint. And then we get to main qualifying, got himself through to Q3, set an excellent lap about halfway through Q3, and then it just all went wrong. Massive crash towards the end of the session along the main finish straight, basically so much damage to the car that he wasn't able to start the Grand Prix. So that's why there's an asterisk there. Qualified 7th, but obviously didn't start the race. Number 17, Nico Hulkenberg. So for Hulkenberg, not a great weekend. Sprint qualifying, qualified 12th, and then retired from the sprint with a mechanical DNF. In main qualifying, qualified 19th, out-qualified by his rookie teammate Bjorkman by almost 0.4 of a second. And again, it was a bit, the qualifying performances are a bit concerning given that Bjorkman has so little experience in F1. And the fact that in 2 of the 3 times that he's been up against Bjorkman's actually out-qualified. And then again, Bjorkman's out-qualified him in both sprint qualifying and in main qualifying on tracks that he doesn't know really well, on a track that historically Hulkenberg's been very good at. And then in the main Grand Prix, I thought was all right. But then, of course, had that spin at turn 1 and then was later disqualified because the marshals kind of helped him get back on track. Number 16, Zhou Guangyu. So for Zhou, he actually had a pretty clean weekend in terms of not getting involved in any spins or any crashes, but he was unfortunately very slow, which is why I decided to put him behind quite a few drivers who did crash or spun at some point in the race. Sprint qualifying, qualified 20th, opted to start from the pit lane, got himself up to 17th, not really a whole lot there. And then the main qualifying, to no one's surprise, qualified 20th, out-qualified by Bottas by 1.63 seconds, so not great. And then in the main Grand Prix, finished 15th, which was dead last amongst all classified finishers. Moving up to number 15 is Fernando Alonso. A pretty rough weekend for the Spaniard. Sprint qualifying, qualified 16th, but opted to start from the pit lane and then was able to basically progress to 18th in the sprint. Qualifying went okay, qualified 9th, but again, like his teammate Lance Stroll, also crashed in qualifying. So even though he did out-qualify his teammate Lance Stroll by 1.3 seconds, did crash himself in qualifying, so not great there. Grand Prix was definitely a struggled with pace a bit, and definitely had quite a few instances where he just kind of spun or went off track, went wide at the, I think, Jinsao quite a few times as well. So not a great weekend for Alonso. A lot of issues. I know he said on the radio his back was really hurting him, and that's unfortunate, but it's not going to help him in my power rankings. Number 14 is Oliver Behrman. So for Behrman, he did have some positives from this weekend. First, wet F1 race weekend. He had some good moments in qualifying as well. In sprint qualifying, qualified 10th. Thought he could have been much higher. So again, small mistake on his part there, but still qualified his teammate Hulkenberg. And then the sprint kind of went backwards in pace, finished 14th. Main qualifying, which was the wet one, still qualified Hulkenberg by 4/10, so that's positive. But in the Grand Prix, ended up finishing 12th. A lot of, similar to Alonso, a lot of mistakes, a lot of small spins. I thought the incident with Colapinto was penalized very harshly. I didn't think he deserved the 10-second penalty. But again, he finished. He was one of 15 drivers who actually ended up finishing. And again, finished above Bottas, finished above Alonso, and finished above Zhou. So not a great weekend for Behrman, but I think some positives there. Number 13, Carlos Sainz. So for Sainz, I think you can argue he could have been quite a bit lower in this power ranking if it was not a sprint weekend, but I thought his performances in the sprint were somewhat positive, so that definitely pulls him up a little bit. Sprint qualifying 5th, and then finished 5th in the sprint. Main qualifying, qualified 14th, of course, crashed at like turn 2, and that means that the qualifying gap is going to be a lot bigger than it normally would be, so he was out qualified by 3.3 seconds. Main Grand Prix never really got into the points. Very tough weekend. I think he ended up starting from the pit lane, so actually there should be a mark there for that. But rough Grand Prix for Sainz. Did show some progress, but unfortunately crashed in Sector 2, and that was the end of his weekend. Number 12, Lewis Hamilton. So for Hamilton, pretty rough weekend, I would say, but just given the fact he finished in the points, he ends up finishing a lot higher than he ordinarily would have in that situation. So sprint qualifying 11th, finished sprint 11th, not a great result there. Then in main qualifying, qualified 16th, out-qualified by George Russell by 2.029 seconds. Usually for Hamilton in wet qualifying sessions, it's the other way around. Usually it's him who's giving the beatdown on his teammate. But really struggled in qualifying. Grand Prix was not much better. Was able to make his way up to the field, but there were moments where it felt like the first third of the race, he really struggled for pace. The middle third, really strong pace, and then the final third was back to kind of struggling and got stuck behind Lawson for that final part of the race. But does come home in 10th and does grab a single point. Number 11, Sergio Perez. So for Perez, not an absolute horror show of a weekend like Mexico was, but still a pretty bad weekend. And I think he just is really helped by the fact that there were so many drivers who crashed out one way or another. And Perez actually, in that regard, was pretty good compared to what we normally expect. So sprint qualifying, qualified 13th, was able to progress himself up to 8th for the sprint, so got himself a point. Main qualifying session, qualified 13th, out qualified by his teammate Max Verstappen by 3.8 tenths. So honestly, that's a pretty normal gap for Verstappen and Perez. And given that it was in the wet, I think that's honestly a pretty decent job for Perez. In the Grand Prix, unfortunately, not a great race. Spun on the first lap, and then his race never really got going again after that. I think Red Bull used him as like a test dummy. They asked him to test the wet tires before Verstappen pitted. Or would have pitted, but then of course the red flag came out, so that kind of nullified that. So for Perez, not a great weekend, but I don't think it was an absolute disaster either. Into the top 10 we go. So starting at number 10, I've got Oscarpiastri. So for Piastri, I think definitely a very up and down weekend. The sprint portion of his weekend was very, very good. Qualified on pole for the sprint. Would have won the sprint if he was not asked to basically give up that sprint win to try to help his teammates' World Championship, which, spoiler alert, is basically in the drain after this weekend's Grand Prix. So finished second in the sprint, but of course that should have an asterisk next to it. Qualifying not so great. Qualified 8th, 1.28 seconds off his teammate Norris. So again, that's something that he can definitely try to work on next time we have a wet qualifying session. In the Grand Prix, finished in 8th, had some solid pace at points, but of course got himself involved in that incident with Lawson, which he picked up that 10-second penalty, and then that had to get served at the end of the race. And of course was also asked to swap positions with Norris in the Grand Prix as well, so that certainly didn't help things. But all in all, not a fantastic weekend from Norris, or from Piastri. Speaking of Norris, though, that is the driver I have in number 9. So for Norris, sprint portion pretty good. Not quite as good as his teammate Piastri, but still I thought very, very good for Norris in the sprint. Qualified second, won the sprint, of course, aided by team orders there. Then in qualifying, very, very good result in qualifying. Got on pole position. Out-qualified his teammate Piastri by 1.28 seconds. The Grand Prix, though, is definitely where things started to go wrong for Norris. Like many times this season where Norris has started on pole, he lost a position on the opening lap. So lost that position to Russell, wasn't able to control the pace, wasn't in clean air, although it was, given the weather today, it would have been wet air. But for Norris, that definitely didn't help. Strategy as well with the safety car, maybe got a little bit unlucky, but at the same time, you can also say Verstappen got quite unlucky yesterday with the timing of the red flag. So, luck always goes both ways. And then for Norris, just a couple mistakes all around here and there in the Grand Prix. I think went wide at turn 4 quite a couple times, lost a couple positions there, needed team orders to get past his teammate, etc. So all in all, not a great Grand Prix for Norris, and I've decided to put him in 9th. Next up, we have Valtteri Bottas in 8th. Really unfortunate for Bottas, as this is the kind of Grand Prix that Sauber desperately needed in order to try to score a point this season. But unfortunately for them and for Bottas, didn't quite have the pace, and I don't really blame Bottas for that. Sprint qualifying, qualified 15th, finished the sprint 15th, qualified 11th for the main Grand Prix, out-qualified his teammate Joe by 1.63 seconds. Honestly, qualifying 11th was a minor miracle, and maybe if the timing of the red flag was a little bit different, maybe he ends up in Q3. In the Grand Prix, really struggled with starts, so ends up every time there was a start or a restart, he lost quite a few positions. So it seemed like the Saubers really struggled with tire warm-up, constantly having cold tires on the restarts. But I thought Bottas did what best he could, didn't have any spins or incidents, and came home in 13th place. So that's definitely the closest he's come to points for quite a long time. Number 7, I'm going to go with Liam Lawson. Sprint qualifying, sprint went pretty well. Sprint qualifying finished 8th. In the sprint, not able to hold on to a point, finishes in 9th. Qualifying for the main Grand Prix went pretty well, not quite as good as his teammate, and it was quite clear that RB had a very, very good car for the wet conditions this weekend. So that's why I decided not to put him further up, because it was kind of clear that Tsunoda was the better driver of the two this weekend. But still, his best ever result in qualifying 5th, but out-qualified by his teammate by 3.7 tenths. In the main Grand Prix, I thought did pretty well. Was a bit unfortunate with the incident with Piastri, and struggled a little bit with pace towards the end, but I thought did a really good job of defending from Perez and Hamilton in the closing laps of the race, and came home for another 9th place finish for 2 more points. Number 6, Charles Leclerc. Tricky weekend for Leclerc, but I thought made the most of what he had. Qualified 3rd for the sprint, finished the sprint in 3rd. Of course, benefited from Verstappen getting that VSC penalty to put him back on the sprint podium. Main qualifying was all right. Qualified 6th, out-qualified Sainz by 3.3 seconds, but of course there's a lot of asterisks with that, as Sainz of course crashed out earlier on, so of course not able to really set a representative lap time. Main Grand Prix finishes in 5th. I thought for Leclerc, I thought he had a pretty decent Grand Prix. It was pretty clear Ferrari just didn't have the pace. He got stuck behind the Tsunoda Okon train for so many laps, but I think did a decent enough job defending, such that Max Verstappen, who is clearly the best driver, fastest driver in the wet conditions today, he kept him behind. Was a bit unlucky with the timing of his pit stop and the VSC red flag and everything, but generally kept it on track, kept it clean, and I thought, did a pretty good job this weekend. Number 5, I'm going to go with Pierre Gasly. Now, ordinarily, if you qualify 15th and you're out-qualified by your teammate by 3.4 seconds, usually you would not be this high. But I think the sprint portion was really, really strong, so that definitely helped Gasly a lot. Sprint qualifying, qualified 7th, finished 7th in the sprint, really decent job in the Alpine. Main qualifying, qualified 15th, 3.4 seconds. Again, he could have been another driver who was caught out by the red flag, so I don't know if he could have shown a little bit more, perhaps qualified into Q3, and maybe we're having a very, very different story. But I think honestly, Gasly's probably quite content to be starting 15th after the results of the Grand Prix. Was a bit fortunate with the timing of the red flag, opted not to pit, and then benefited from the red flag. But of course, really decent pace, I thought. Fast enough that he was keeping Russell behind, and of course kept it on the track, didn't spin, didn't crash out like so many other drivers did. Number 4, Yuki Tsunoda. Really, really strong weekend in Tsunoda. Arguably one of his best weekends in F1. I think in an alternative universe, could have gotten his first podium this weekend if things went a little bit different. Sprint portion of his weekend wasn't fantastic, which is why I decided not to put him one position higher. But sprint qualifying 17th, sprint finished 15th. Not really anything that he'll be super wanting to write home about. Main qualifying, though, was absolutely fantastic. His best qualifying result in Formula 1. Qualified 3rd, out-qualified his teammate by 3.7 tenths. And then was doing really, really well in the Grand Prix. Held 3rd place for most of the first portion of the race. Overtaken by Okon towards the end, right before I think the safety car was called out. So again, probably I think might have made a mistake there, or maybe just got caught out by Okon's pace. And then, pitted for the wet tires, which was unfortunately the best strategy, but this is Formula 1, this is the FIA. We can't have racing on wet tracks, so unfortunately it was red flagged right away, and the safety car came out, nullified all of that pace advantage, the strategic advantage that Tsunoda had, so really unfortunate there. But after the restart, I think lost positions as well, so again, but that being said, pretty good race for Tsunoda, ends up in 7th place. Alright, into the top 3 we go. In number 3, I'm going to go with George Russell. So for George, sprint portion was alright, not fantastic. Qualified 6th, finished the race in 6th. But main qualifying session, very, very strong. Qualified 2nd, out-qualified his teammate Lewis Hamilton by 2.029 seconds. And definitely could have won this Grand Prix if the timing of the red flag, if his strategy was a little bit different. Unfortunately, a little bit of bad luck there. Pitted, safety car came out, red flag comes out, and he's kind of stuck in, what was it? It was 5th, I think, 4th or 5th, when we got going after the red flag. But decent pace, was not quite good, had the pace or the ability to overtake to get on the podium, but I thought I had a very, very strong Grand Prix. Alright, number 2, Esteban Ocon. So for Ocon, arguably you could put him number 1, but I think sprint performance not great, so I think that definitely held him back. And I think honestly, spoiler alert, Verstappen's drive today in the Grand Prix was absolutely amazing, one of the best that we've seen in recent memory. So it's very, very hard to kind of justify not putting him in number 1. But still, Ocon, he'll be very, very happy with a number 2 on his power ranking, on my power rankings. But again, he's obviously not going to watch this. So sprint qualifying 16th, sprint 13th, not fantastic. Qualifying went very, very well. Qualified 4th, out-qualified his teammate by 3.4 seconds. Main Grand Prix, very, very strong pace again, benefited quite a few other, like his teammate Gasly, with the red flag, but still kept it on the track, had decent pace, and came home for a very well-deserved 2nd place. So, number 1 on my power rankings, not going to be much of a surprise, is Max Verstappen. Sprint portion of the weekend was okay. Bit of a mistake with the VSC infringement, which of course dropped him from 3rd to 4th, but given the result of the Grand Prix, doesn't really matter. So qualified 12th, of course, had that 5-place grid penalty, so we actually started in 17th. And it was also caught out by the red flag, so probably should have started quite a bit higher. Probably should have gone into Q3, probably started towards the bottom of the top 10, I would say. Very, very strong pace in the race. Excellent start, got himself up to 11th, I think, on the opening lap. And then just picked off cars one by one in that first stint. Really, really smart decision with the strategy to not pit. Waited for the red flag, which of course, again, on one hand, it's good strategic decision. On the other hand, it is a bit of luck. But in that portion between the red flag and that second safety car where Sainz crashed, I think second safety car. Pace was okay, not really able to overtake Okon. Got Okon on the safety car restart and basically just drove away from everyone. Set consecutive fastest laps. Extremely fast pace. I think the stat I was reading was that 10 of his fastest laps would have been good enough. 10 of his laps that he set would have been good enough for fastest lap. So yeah, outstanding pace, kept it on track, didn't make any mistakes in the wet conditions. I thought, very, very, very well done. And he's basically won himself the title with that drive and the result for Norris today. So there you go. There is my power rankings for the 2024 Brazilian Grand Prix. Very, very exciting Grand Prix. And unfortunately now we have a 3-week break until our next triple header. So again, I guess we kind of have to finish on a high of the Brazil race, and we're just going to have to wait till the next set of races. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.